Hello, this is Elizabeth Clare Brewington with Discover Brightside, the video podcast. And I am so honored to have such a guest for you, my dear audience, because I know that this is going to be very dear to our hearts. And I am here to introduce you to Brian Ahearn, and he is the founder of Influence People LLC. He's an international speaker, trainer, coach, and consultant, and he helps clients apply the science of influence to ensure more professional success in the office and personal happiness in at home. And he has appeared on our show before, and I'll make sure that you have that link. But right now, today, we're talking about this amazing book that he has written, and it's called His Story, My Story, and Our Story. So you might want to know who's the his, who's the my, and who's the our. And it's a story that he's told through the lens of a son exploring his father's journey as a Marine veteran, and we'll reflect on the emotional toll of PTSD, the ripple effects on a family life, and the way communities can foster understanding and healing. And we all know, because we've had aging parents, and we all know how awful PTSD is. So I hope you can get this book this holiday season and get a couple of books so that you can give some away. So, Brian, what a story and what a book. Tell us a little bit about what inspired you to share such a personal journey about
Mhm.
your family.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me back on. It's good to see you, Elizabeth, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with your audience, especially those who are veterans out there or sons or daughters of veterans. I myself did not serve, but my dad served in the Marine Corps from 1962 to 1969, and that included combat tour over in Vietnam. Um, our relationship, as a kid, I really admired him. I'm like, wow, my dad's the toughest guy in the world. He's a Marine. He was over in combat. Of course, you don't know what that means when you're, 8 or 9 years old. But I really looked up to my dad. And we got to a point in our relationship where, as I learned things about what had happened between he and my mom, I started having questions, and our relationship really got tense for many, many years. And then we were able to turn a corner. And it was after his passing in September of 2020 that I decided I would sit down and write a book. He had written pretty extensively about his time in the Corps in Vietnam. And so that's a big part of the book. But I look at the journey of our family and my relationship in particular with him. So it's his story, it's my story, but together it's our story. And I really hope that young people in the service, and in particular Marines, might read it and make some better choices than he did. And just maybe it'll preserve some relationships, maybe it'll preserve family, to learn from our story, his mistakes and my mistakes too, in terms of how we were relating. But I felt like it was something that needed to be shared with the world.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great book. I've been reading it myself, and I felt like it's so important to walk through, somebody who's a hero, and really, at a time when you all should have been celebrating, you were dealing with PTSD. So, can you describe like this book? Like, how long did you take to put this book together? Because obviously you wrote your story, his story, and then, our story. So,
The book came out last June. I had finished the writing by the end of 2023. So it was a good year-long plus project, probably. It was really good for me personally to sit down and reflect. Our memories fade over time, and there were things that I had forgotten, but as I looked through old documents, as I read journals that I had kept when I was in high school and college and after, and I was able to see more good than I was remembering at certain points in time. Because in some sense, my dad was a hero. There's a part of the story you'll read where he was incredibly courageous. It could have cost him his career while he was in Vietnam. And so he did some heroic things, but he also had a side where nobody talked about PTSD back in the late 60s and the early 70s. And so his wild side of womanizing, he was physically abusive with my mom at times. Uh, Staying out late, drinking, and doing things like that, while still maintaining an aura of respectability because he had a great career. So, by day he's suit and tie and all this, but on the weekends, and there's a story in there where my uncle, his brother Kevin, told me at the funeral. He said, "Yeah, I remember when I flew out to California in 1969. Your dad got me an interview. He said he picked me up at the airport Friday afternoon. He said we went straight to the bars and the strip clubs and the pool halls, and we slept on the beach, and we woke up and we did it all again. We didn't get to your house until Sunday afternoon." And he's laughing. And I said, "Kevin, that's why my mom was always so pissed off." And it was almost as if he like sobered up or something. And he said, "You know what? She had a right to be." But that was just the norm for them. Like they don't think anything of it, even though you got a wife and kids at home. We're going to just go out and raise hell and have fun. But I think my dad was trying to get a lot of that anger and aggression out, and there wasn't anybody to talk to. So in my journey with him, as I was learning these things, at first I was really angry. And then as I began to understand more about PTSD and more about him, I started to really have a lot of grace for him.
That's true. You know, so when did all this happen? So how old were you? So he went on combat, came
Mhm.
back home.
Mhm.
How old were you at the time? And when he came back, was he perfect? When did the PSD start, and when did all this trauma begin?
Um, Well, I think my mom would say that it was happening while he was in the Corps. So I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii, because he was stationed in Hawaii, and so he was out there in I think the late '63 or something like that. I was born in 1964. He went off to Vietnam. I think it was in late '64, early '65. I don't remember right off the top of my head, but he was there I think for 12, 13 months. So I think my mom would say that it started before then, because the book explores his upbringing too. Alcoholic father, very dysfunctional family. In some respects, my dad became the very thing he hated in his father for a period of time. So you have all this stuff that's building up, and you throw on top of it, what you go through as a Marine, but then what you go through if you're in combat in Vietnam. And there's no outlet for you when you come home. I never saw any of that directly because I was so young. I mean, he gets out of the Marine Corps. We move to California in 1969. I'm 5 years old. My sister had a lot more memories than I did, and we're only a year and a half apart. So it was kind of amazing what she remembered, and I'm right there with her, but I didn't remember those things. And I would say too that, my dad, for all the things that were going on, was never abusive to my sister or I. He could be emotionally negligent, kind of distant, didn't really get to know him because he bottled up all that stuff that had gone on. But my mom, like I said, she took the brunt of it. She's the one at home and he's not home. Where is he? What's he doing? Some of the physical altercations that took place. But the one that I do remember, and this is where I was so thankful that I had a journal because I went back and I read exactly what I wrote as a 15-year-old. The morning after their final fight, screaming and yelling and dishes breaking and things. And then about a week later, 9 or 10 days later, when he moved out, and I had my exact thoughts as a 15-year-old that readers can see because it's so easy, I think, for families that are dysfunctional or families that go through divorce to think, oh, the kids are doing great. The kids, they're off doing their hobbies and this and that. No, they're dealing with this stuff. They just don't talk to their mom and dad about it. And so I think readers will really appreciate the firsthand accounts that I had of exactly what went on and what I was thinking, and the firsthand accounts of my dad and why he went into the Corps and who he met and all of those things.
Um, that is always such a challenge. So you pretty much were raised by your mom then. 15 is a young age. Yeah. So that so what was some of the so how did you all reconcile? I mean, what was life like? Did you all have Christmases, holidays? Did you see your father? You know, how did you reconcile these challenging moments, and how did you just fit into a normal family lifestyle?
I think my mom said that for approximately half of the time they were married, which was 20 years, he was not in the house. Now, some of that would have been time over in Vietnam. But as an example, when we lived in California, we moved out there. After a year, he moved out, and for 2 years, it was my mom and my sister and I living in apartments, and then they reconciled, and he moved back in, and we moved to Connecticut. So it didn't feel like he wasn't there all the time. But when you start piecing it together, 2 years is a big chunk there. And then, at 15 years old, when he moves out, so there you got the rest of high school. Um, but he always made time where, if we weren't together as a family, we might go spend Thanksgiving with him or something like that. Um, but I will say that as that 15-year-old, when he moved out, and I'm wrestling with how this is going to impact me, are my grades going to go down, or am I going to just say the heck with them? I'm going to show them I can do this without them, and I'm going to get good grades. But I didn't know what was going to happen or how it was going to play out, and I'm very thankful for sports and coaches, and when I got into weightlifting, just some solid men who kept me on the straight and narrow.
Wow. So this is really important that you know everybody gets this book because military families um are different. Like, we had a helicopter pilot who talked about Vietnam and how his job was to carry dead bodies back. And on occasion, there would be some people that were alive. And he felt like it was his responsibility to, fly as best as he could so that he could save that even one or two lives,
Mhm.
uh, besides just bodies that he was carrying back and forth. Um, but just waking up in the middle of the night, going to the supermarket and having a breakdown.
Mhm.
So Vietnam was not an easy experience, and families have definitely taken the toll for that. So what advice would you give to families today for healing with
Mhm.
similar struggles that you've experienced? And
Um,
thank you for writing the book because that really helps.
oh, you're welcome. There's a section in there where I talk about that. But the first thing I would say is uh, don't accept abnormal behavior and try to rationalize it or justify it. Especially if it gets to physical. um, Immediately um, get out of harm's way. Don't think, well, he won't do it again. That was one time, and all of those things, because you don't realize what's probably going on inside that individual that has led them to that point. So I would say you don't keep yourself in harm's way. But for me, what really helped was trying to understand my dad. And as I said earlier, extending grace wherever possible, never accepting bad behavior, certainly calling it out if he said something or did something like, hey, Dad, that's not right. So not just passively accepting it, but also not rejecting him. And it was through me pressing and asking questions that I think got him to sit down and start reflecting and writing. Because when he gave me what he wrote, and I hesitate to say like a manuscript, but it was probably at least 40 pages of a Word doc or something. So it was pretty extensive. He said, maybe this will answer some questions, maybe it'll raise some more. That was his way of saying, I've been thinking about what you've been asking me about. I've been reflecting on it, and here's, what I'm thinking. So I really appreciated that. So I think the fact that I had extended grace, but where I made a mistake, at least in his view, and maybe in hindsight, was I was probably too aggressive with demanding answers to questions. But that was part of the blow up that we had. I said I admired him growing up, and then as a young adult, we'd go play golf, have some beers and just have a good time. But it was around my 30th birthday when we had a blow up. And when that happened, I was enraged. I mean, it was like a volcano came up in me of all these things that I knew had gone on, but I had never questioned or said anything about. And suddenly I wanted answers. And when we got together to have dinner, and he couldn't understand why I wanted to rehash the past. And I remember saying to him, I said, Dad, what if I hit Joe? That was his wife until he passed. They were married for 38 years, and she's a wonderful lady whom he credits for helping him come back from the edge. But I said, what would you do if I hit Joe? And he leaned across the table, Elizabeth, and he looked me in the eye and he goes, I will effing kill you if you ever touch her. And I said, what if it was 5 years ago? And he goes, I don't care when it was. I will effing kill you. And I said, good. Now you know how I feel. It doesn't matter that the divorce was 12 years ago. For me, it's it's now, and we have to talk about it. And so I dove in. I'm like, why'd you hit mom? Why'd you cheat on her? Why this? Why that? And you can imagine a Marine doesn't like being questioned that way. But I give him credit because he didn't effing try to kill me. He didn't get up and leave. He stuck it out, and we stuck it out. It was really tense, like I said, for years, but we finally started turning a corner. And when he passed, we were in a good place. I loved going down and seeing him. He really appreciated us coming down to Florida to see him. So I hope that gives people hope when they read that.
I hope so too, because I've had a lot of Vietnam veterans in our group, and they've talked about how they've banged the wall when they were talking to the doctor and lost their temper in the parking lot, and so we've seen a lot of that, and I think there's no right or wrong way. There's
Mhm.
really no right or wrong way, because you could be very kind, and then they'll take the kindness as a weakness,
Mhm.
be authoritative, and they could get upset about that. How dare you question me? And then so I don't know if there's any right or wrong way, but I think your book is full of advice, and it's got beautiful scriptures, and I think it's really encouraging when you read it, and yeah. So now this big manuscript that he handed over to you, what did you do with it? How did you read it, and how did you compile the book?
Um, Trying to think, that was 15 years ago. I think we were on vacation. Our daughter was 14 at the time, so yeah, it would be 15 years ago that he gave me that. And I remember reading it. I don't remember turning around to necessarily question him about things that were in there. Um, it wasn't a lot of exploration, like he never explored like maybe this contributed to the infidelity or my violent outbursts at time or things like that. It wasn't that deep. But I give him all the credit in the world that he just sat and he thought about it. He thought about why he went in with two of his best friends and then they kind of abandoned him. And here he is in the Marines over in Vietnam being shot at. Um, that that he would be willing to recount those stories because even the stories that were a little bit lighthearted that he wrote about had to also dredge up the fact that, you know, he had brothers that he lost over there. So it was really, as I said earlier, memories fade, and I can't really recall at that time, but I know that as we were getting closer to his passing, which was totally unexpected. So I didn't know this, but I had read a book called The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that really talked about PTSD and a lot with Vietnam vets, that there are going to be things within us that if we don't get them out somehow, they're going to come out in a way that you may not like. Um, as I read that book, I had kind of a revelation where sometimes I would look at artwork and I would think, whoever made that painting or whatever must be whacked. What is wrong with them? That is like, but now I understand that's the only way they can express this turmoil that's within them. They don't have words for it. but it's an expression. That gave me a lot more grace for my dad too. And that's where I have at the beginning of the book an unfinished letter because I sat down and started writing him a letter about how much I was learning from the book and was looking forward to seeing him sometime and to be able to talk about that. And within about a month, he passed away completely unexpectedly.
That must have been very tough for you. But I think he really loved you and respected you because if he gave you his manuscript, to me, that would be the highest um, level of appreciation. So, in a way, he was telling you that, Brian, I love you. I love you, and I'm sorry for whatever happened, and I'm giving you my story. And then you were able to take that story and the pain and your whole childhood, which must have been very painful, to turn that around to write a book to help others. That is where I applaud you. So, in a way, I applaud him for having the courage to give you the manuscript. And then I applaud you for taking that pain and converting that to help someone else. Because sometimes when we are so in so much pain, we only think about our own pain. We don't want to share it with others. So,
Yeah.
this is a very big book, and I think that it really needs to be told. The story needs
Mm.
to be told. So let's get to the third part, which is our story. So that is where you've probably reconciled now, and you've forgiven him or not forgiven him, but you've come to that point of, let's make this our
Yeah.
story. So tell me a
Well,
little bit about that.
in in a sense, so there's not a section that's like his and mine, and there is the whole Marine Corps thing. But um, what I came to realize as I'm writing the book is, yes, I have my own life. My dad had his own life, but the interplay, and him being my father, he's a huge, huge influence on me in ways that I didn't recognize until I started reflecting on them. One simple example, being Marine, you can imagine he maintained discipline. Not that he was hitting us or anything like that, but you just knew you better get in line with what Dad's saying. When he drops me off at college, he said, treat this like a business. Go to class from 8 to 5, do your homework, go to class. He goes, you can have as much fun at night and on the weekends as you want if you do that. And I took his advice, and it was great. I did that. I would go to early classes, study in the afternoon, did extremely well at a really good university, had evenings to work out and hang with my buddies and do all that stuff. But that discipline that he instilled there carried into everything else that I do. And when I left my corporate role 7 years ago, it is not hard for me to be up super early and to sit down and do everything that I need to do to not put things off, to make sure that I lay out a plan and I follow that plan. I give him credit for instilling that. So that's our story there. He gave me, a really good part of him that I've incorporated and I try to pass on to people as wisdom and advice. So I feel like the older I got, the more I saw this mixture. Um, when I was suspended from high school, and I write about that, I had no idea that my angry outburst at a teacher had anything to do with what my parents were going through. When you're 17 years old, you can't process that. I'm just thinking like and it's her fault. But now I look back and I realize that had everything to do with it. I had so much anger, and it just would occasionally erupt at different times. So I've tried to take that lesson and um, taught it to our daughter when she was young so that she would have grace for people. I'd say, Abigail, you never know what they're going through. They may be doing something stupid or bad or whatever, but you have no idea what is going on at their home. And so just try to give them as much grace as you can.
Very true. So this is Veterans Day is coming up, November 11th, and this is also a great book that I would encourage military families, or even if you're not a military family, to get the book, because Thanksgiving is a great time to read a book. You're with your family, and you're waiting for the turkey, or and it's just a great time to get a good book, get get this one. It's available everywhere. It'll be available. I think it is available on the Brightside store website. So I encourage everyone to read it. And we are launching our reading and screening room now. And so I will try to get some readings from the book that I hope will inspire you as well. So, would you like to give us some last comments before we end this interview?
Um, I would encourage anybody to sit down and think about and write about their life. It doesn't have to end up being a book, but I recognize, like, as I journaled, how valuable that was for me to be able to look back in this project. But as I read those journals, I clearly see the hand of God working in my life. I clearly see things about, wow, when I was a teenager, I don't want my grandson to be like I was, even though outwardly I was a good kid. But that writing, I know this, that writing helped kind of let a little air out of the balloon so it wouldn't burst as often as it could have. And I think it's just a great exercise to reflect on your life and say, why am I the way I am? You know, who am I? Why am I this way? And you begin to start putting the pieces of the puzzle together to realize the influences that these things have had on you to make you the person that you are. That gives you a chance too to then say, no more. I'm not going to continue down that path. And my wife and I did that, especially with our daughter. We were very fortunate. We were in a good church. We'd done counseling and things, and we were starting to get a handle on who we were. But we were determined that when Abigail came into the world, that we were not going to saddle her with these parts of us that we didn't like. We were going to do our best to sew into her the best parts. And in doing that, I think the world gets better one person at a time. If she does that with her son or grandson, then the world's even a little bit better. And I think writing and reflecting allow you to take that step.
Absolutely. I think that is so true. Um, Journaling, writing, sharing the stories is all part of great healing. Brian, I have really enjoyed this interview and I have really, really enjoyed your book as well. And we will continue to tell people about this book all through this veteran, I call it the season of veterans, but year round,
Mm,
because I think, my dear veterans, you are loved year round. And don't, even when you have your anger bursts or
mm,
say unkind things, we forgive you
mm.
because you serve this country and you've done great things for us. And so you are just loved the way you are. We don't want you to change or anything. But get this book, and especially for military families, I think, especially now during government shutdown and everybody's so upset about life and jobs and I don't know what you all must be going through. But we want to thank you for your service and we want you to get this book and be encouraged. And if you get the book, write a review because that's what we talk about all the time. Write a review. So thank you for watching Discover Brightside. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. Tell us what you think about Brian's book. If you happen to buy his book, snap a photo so we know you're paying attention to the channel and keep this channel alive by writing comments and subscribing. So thank you for watching Brightside.